Hey everyone, welcome to HBCU Game Day. I'm Nicole Carr from Atlanta. Today is a very special show. We're not going to talk any sports at all. We're going to talk about the real world, if you will, because there is a lot happening. This past week, Donald Trump paused all federal funding with loans and grants here in America, and it created a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos, and there are a lot of people that are upset and looking for answers. So we're going to have a conversation around this subject today, and joining us now is a very special guest. It is Nicole Carr. She is a Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist. She is a journalist professor at Morehouse College and soon to be a first-time author. So very involved in the media and journalism field. Nicole, your first appearance here on HBCU Game Day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, let's get right into it. This week, the big pause happened in terms of federal grants and loans. It affected communities from nonprofits, educational institutions, particularly in our interest, HBCUs. And I must say, Nicole's a graduate of Winston-Salem State University, as you can see as well. You teach in the AUC. You deal with students at Clark Atlanta, Morehouse, Spelman. Kind of what happened and what was the feeling on a HBCU campus and with the students when this news came out?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to say that it's kind of hard to keep up with what's happening because there's a lot being thrown at us each day, right? The news cycle is so intense, and there's something coming from this administration, something new every morning, and you're just trying to navigate several points throughout the day. Like, what does this mean for me? This order on the freeze, and we should point out that before that 5 o'clock deadline hit, that a federal judge had put a pause on this. But we do need to talk about what this encompasses because it could very well move forward, and we don't know what's ahead. But there's a pause on this throughout the day. There was a frenzy. I mean, I was hearing from friends who work in all these sectors that you're talking about how their financing for the year, for the fiscal year would be impacted, what that means for their nonprofits, for their daycares, for their state-run programs that are subsidized by financial or federal finances. But on campus and with our students, and we've even heard this within our own families, the immediate concern here is now, how am I going to pay for school? Like, if this were really to happen, how am I going to pay for school? Because I rely on it. I did like a wellness check. I used to do this during the height of COVID, or at least the height of us talking about the pandemic. I would turn to the students and say, hey, how are you feeling today? What's going on with you? What's on your mind? And we're in journalism classes. So like, how are you grappling with the news cycle? And so yesterday we were online because of some infrastructure issues in our building. And I had a student right away say, this is how I go to school. I use federal financial aid to go to school, cannot come here without it. And so we should remember, as we're talking about our institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, according to the Ed Department, some 82% of our students enrolled at our institutions have some sort of financial aid from the federal government to stay afloat. So that's why it's important for us to be talking about it today.
Well, when you look at your students and you do this wellness check, I mean, if you have 80% of students on average, not necessarily in your particular class, but on average, that are dealing with the dependence upon their Pell Grant and federal aid, I would imagine that creates a lot of unease, a lot of anxiety, and that's not conducive to a learning environment.
No, it's not. And also for us as a community to continue having this conversation and for us to cover this issue in our outlets and breaking it down for our audiences, we also need to understand how everything works. I just do want to point out that with each day and with all these new initiatives, that the chaos is absolutely the point, right? It's hard, especially when we're on social, to parse through this and to say, okay, how is this going to affect me because some things aren't really clear, others are. And I know after the break, we're going to be talking more about specifics with this order and the potential for impact. But yeah, absolutely, it creates an environment that isn't, reassuring to the students. So.
And we talked about Project 2025 during the election season. And, we were given the thought that, Donald Trump has nothing to do with that. Has never heard of it. He's not involved. But the things we have seen in the first 2 weeks of this administration is right down the playbook of what was readily available for us to see with Project 2025. And this is potentially having a severe impact on HBCUs.
Right. So I just want to point out also yesterday with that freeze, we were hearing from the White House that this is not going to impact later on in a statement issued to outlets that this won't impact that type of aid, the Pell Grants, that federal student aid, any direct individual aid. You also, if you listen to the new White House press secretary speak, say that all of this was designed to cut out illegal DEI activity and woke initiatives to see what we fund. So if we haven't gotten to the point yet of reporting how this is all racially charged, how this is all affecting us, this language, that's nonsense, because what is woke anything? What are we even talking about? We also had President Trump as the candidate saying, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. And this all envelops, this plan is all a part of a page right out of the Project 2025 playbook. And he absolutely has everything to do with it, as do the architects of this who were supporting a second Trump administration. So I don't know that I say all that to say we do not know and probably should not trust that direct aid would be impacted. But again, we're going to go point by point with ways that this document that was issued this week absolutely impacts our institutions. But I thought to start, though, and not to take your lead away from you on the conversation here, but if we're going to understand how these things in rapid speed impact us, then we have to go to a little point of history and kind of look at the way that our institutions dance with the federal government and always have. And so it's important to talk about emancipation and the establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau, right? So from 1863 to 1872, we've got the Bureau set up, and its primary responsibilities are integrating us into this society as free men and women, right? So the Bureau is helping to reunite our families. It's helping to legalize our marriages. That little 40 acres and a mule that we think we're promised. That we're still waiting. That actually some got, and it was taken away. That those initiatives are healthcare. Our ability to live. We're sitting here in Georgia. There was a Freedmen's Bureau hospital right there in Savannah that was actually run by an administrator who goes to Howard University later on to run the hospital there. So we're looking at healthcare, housing, but we're also looking at education. And so if we're going to talk about the Mecca, hopefully not offending anybody who believes their institution is the Mecca,
Howard, Hampton, just hold on. Hold on, Hampton. It'll be okay.
Hold on here. So Howard University is our sole federally funded HBCU, okay? So it is, they're founded 1867. Otis T. Howard is your Union General, who Lincoln has as the commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau. And they come in to educate. Actually, in mission statements, it's men of all color, but it's specifically, it's really geared toward us becoming professionals and being trained in medicine and the sciences, to be teachers, the theology department, all of these things to reintegrate the Negro into society with this higher education. And so Congress appropriates a large amount of money to Howard University every year. Part of this money is really funding the hospital, which we know is critical not only to the community there in the Shaw community in DC and surrounding areas, but it's a research hospital. It's the teaching hospital. So our Black physicians, a large number of them, HBCUs, are still educating most of our Black physicians. It is a teaching hospital. And so that is federal money. That is where we're reliant on it. In 2022, Howard gets $217 million. This is excluding the hospital, right? From federal appropriations. And I'm keeping my laptop up here because I wanted to look at the fiscal year and what that looks like under a Trump administration.
And I think that'll be a good point to pick up on. Okay. Let's take a quick break. Okay. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more about Howard, its unique position in the HBCU community, and we're going to have more on this conversation as we talk about the big pause of 2025 with federal grants and loans and how that might impact HBCUs. This is a special edition of HBCU Game Day. I'm Tolly Carr. She's Nicole Carr. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to HBCU Game Day. I'm Tolly Carr, Atlanta, Georgia. A special edition of HBCU Game Day. Return now to our special guest, Nicole Carr. We're talking about the effects of what's happening in our world. Project 2025 is here. We saw this past week the freeze on federal grants and loans and how that's impacting our country. We having the conversation about HBCUs and what that means to our community. Before the break, you were talking about Howard University, how they're uniquely positioned in the federal landscape, if you will, because they have a very unique qualifier.
Yeah, they do. And so do a number of our other institutions. But I was just wanting to give a little history about our relationship with the federal government as it pertains to our institutions. So yeah, you've got Howard on one end is the only federally funded institution that gets this appropriation from Congress. And a lot of that is going toward the research and teaching hospital that much of that DC community, Shaw community depends on for healthcare. This is really the mecca or one of the meccas of Black healthcare.
Like literally.
Yes, of Black healthcare. And that money comes from Congress. A lot of it does. You do have philanthropic dollars, but this is federal appropriated money that we're looking at. And in 2022, outside of what the federal government was providing Howard for the hospital, $217 million from the federal government goes to the operations at Howard University. That's a big number. That's a big part of the budget. So I pulled up the 2025 finance expectations for the federal government to Howard. The Trump administration is expected to fully meet the university's overall request of $300 million, and this is from the Department of Ed website, to support construction of a new Howard University hospital in the fiscal year 2025. Congress appropriated $7 million in fiscal year 2021 to begin work to modernize that. And so we're also looking at this $300 million overall request that is expected just for that portion of operations. So that's major. That's our connection to the federal government through one of our institutions. But prior to Howard's founding in 1867, you had a Vermont senator, Justin Morrill, who introduces a bill in the 1850s. So we're still in enslavement. And he's saying, hey, we need to set aside federal land for public colleges. So as you can imagine, at the time, we're enslaved, so we're not going to college. This is an initiative that's really going to help poor whites, entrepreneurial whites. This is going to help white people, right? So they have tens of millions of acres in land. And they say, okay, the federal government is going to divvy this up between your representatives and your officials in Congress, and you're going to be able to use this for educational purposes. Now, where do you think the federal government was taking this land to give away to the states?
I'm thinking people of color probably got the short end of the stick here.
Yes. The
natives?
Native Americans is taking this land from Native Americans to set aside for public education. And at the time, so Congress passes this moral act or bill. They pass it as law in 1859, but President Buchanan doesn't want anything to do with it because President Buchanan is a modern day Republican. He's a Democrat in those times. He's a modern day Republican, and he believes in ding, 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 states' rights. Okay? He said the federal government has no business in education. We ought to leave this up to the states. Well, you get to the Civil War, and we've got folks who don't want to be together anymore. The Confederate States are breaking off. They're their own thing. They believe in the states' rights and all of this. And once they're out of there, Lincoln is able to pass this first act in 1862. He signs off on this land grant for public education act. That's the Morrill Land Grant. Again, it is not for Black folks, and it's not for us until 1890. So by then, you've got the establishment of Howard. You've got other institutions of ours. Now, remember, a lot of our institutions, I'm even sitting here thinking about Morehouse right now, we're tied to religion. We're tied to the Baptists. We're tied to, our founding, Shaw University, North Carolina. This is where we're getting our names. But for the public land grant institutions, and top of mind, I'm thinking about, as we look at the 1890s and these appropriations, you think about Booker T. Washington, you think about Tuskegee University, but the 1890 version of this act says that you can't have racial discrimination in student admissions to these universities. So we get like 19 HBCUs out of this, and they're called 1890 institutions. I've got a map up right now looking at this. This is Lincoln U, Central State, West Virginia State, Delaware State, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, Virginia State, North Carolina A&T, South Carolina State, Fort Valley State here in Georgia, Alabama A&M, Tuskegee, FAMU, Southern, Alcorn, University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Langston, and Prairie View. So this comes out of that second act. We get federal appropriations, just like Howard is the only, federally funded institution. We get appropriations through this act to 19 institutions. So I don't know, do we have time in this segment to talk about today?
Well, we've got a couple of minutes here.
Okay.
You've come across the memo itself, and land grant was a very specific way to describe, like you come across this Trump memo. It doesn't just say, hey, HBCU, but
right.
Land grant.
I'm going to do this while we're on air. If you type in HBCU, you're only going to get one hit in terms of these funds that they want to pause and have reviewed and sent back to them in this spring.
And you're searching the actual memo that President Trump
sent out to the agencies. So that's the Agriculture Business Innovation Center at HBCU. It's saying to take a look at that. But that's not what we're called here. If you go to 1890, and I'm just going to type this out right here, you have 9 hits. A few of them are duplicates. But then you start seeing payments to land-grant colleges and Tuskegee, 1890 institution capacity building grants. Let's see. Let me keep scrolling through here. Where's my next hit? Extension services at 1890 colleges and Tuskegee University. Facility improvements at 1890 facilities. Scholarships for students at 1890 institutions. That's outside of Pell Grants.
So it's not that it's hidden, but you have to know what you're looking for if you're going to research this information and find out like how this actually could impact us.
Right. So when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in facilities, these could be your dorm rooms. These could be your classrooms. These could be your innovation centers. We know when we talk about A&T, it's coming from North Carolina. This is the premier institution for your Black engineers, for all of this science innovation when it comes to our farming, the health of our communities. I mean, Tuskegee, A&T, FAMU. we lead innovation in these areas, and certainly do when it comes for equity initiatives in the Black community. Reviewing this money requires us to understand how we're designated within the federal government, but also to understand how vague the Trump administration has been in what they're wanting federal workers to look to cut. If you're saying, oh, there won't be any effect to direct aid, well, I'm directly impacted by my classroom, by my learning programs, by the funding to do this research that produces the professionals that we need to go out there. And then you have a White House press secretary sitting up there saying this is an attempt to parse out illegal DEI movement. Well, what does that mean in relation to this? So we've got these very vague orders, but very clear impact that specifically names our institutions in this 52-page document. Right. And we're not designated as HBCUs in the document. We are designated as those 1890 institutions, which impacts a lot of our major research innovation institutions.
All right, let's pause right there. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more about how we can reshape our thinking when we look at what's going on in the world and some key things to look for so we can stay on top of what might be coming down the pipe. It's a special edition of HBCU Game Day. We'll be right back. This is how crazy the world is right now. We're recording this on Wednesday. Some of you people might see this today. You might see it on Sunday. It's January the 29th. During our commercial break, the order was rescinded. This is the fluency of chaos that we live in right now. But Nicole, I'm sure you would agree. Let me just ask you, was this just floating something out there to see how it would land?
Well, no, because the plan has been in the works. I mean, we've talked about, and you've seen the reports about this being a page right out of Project 2025. When we were talking about at the school board level, and for those who don't know, I spent years investigating the so-called parental rights movement within school boards and this call for the end to the Department of Education. I don't think all of us were exactly sitting here thinking about what the end of the Department of Ed would mean to these institutions. Literally, if you want to figure out like what the playbook is with anything above your school board, look at the fights, look at the chaos that was there. It's kind of like the test ground for everything that we've seen roll back or be attacked on every level, corporate, private, in the Supreme Court. You can look to the school board chaos for that playbook. So even though this has been rescinded while we've been on air, it is absolutely a part of a problem or a playbook in sowing distrust in the federal government, in the institutions. And let's remember, like, as we have gone through this kind of history of HBCUs in the federal government, we don't get to establishment without, or funding without the federal government in so many cases. We don't get to integration, and let's not kid ourselves. It's not that Black folks were like, hey, we need to be with everyone else. We need to be with white folks to move forward here. We were asking for equity, equality, and resources, and the ability to even go to school. And so we don't integrate hospitals, workplaces, and schoolhouses, campuses, or establish some of our campuses without the intervention of the federal government. So what's going on right now in dismantling this is like reverse engineering of everything that got us to this little bit of progression that we've had since. We can look at different points, post-enslavement, we can look at Reconstruction, we can look at Civil Rights Act of 65. But the use of the federal government, we see how much we rely on the federal government, even when we think we're in our little corner of the world. It's not just the dance that we dance or the waltz we dance with the IRS every year. It's not just, that, hey, this stuff has nothing to do with me. It actually makes our country go round.
Exactly. In the final minute that we have here in the show, how important is it for people? You're an investigative journalist. You know how to parse through information. We live in such an age of disinformation and so much just fake stuff out there. I don't want to say fake news, but just fake stuff that's out there in 60 seconds or less. How important is it for people to get quality information and really put effort into these things that are going to potentially impact their lives?
Yeah, one, we don't want to panic. Two, we absolutely need to be historically informed, whether that's of many years past or in recent years. How do the systems that I work within, how do they work and why do they work that way? And who are some trusted voices? Who are some people who are going to slow this thing down, tell me why this matters, and really explain kind of what my options are in moving forward. Our media is a part of community that we will need, that we've always needed, but that we will need in the long run to make it through these very chaotic and stressful times. And pick a day or 2 or 3 a week where you kind of catch up with everything, because Lord knows we can't be tied to this stuff.
Yeah.
All day.
Doom scrolling is appropriately named.
Yeah.
I would say. She is an Emmy Award-winning, soon-to-be published author, journalism professor at Morehouse College, investigative reporter. She is Nicole Carr. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, a special edition of HBCU Game Day. Thank you for hanging out with us here today.